In the year 1911, the streets of Cairo were alive with rumor. The kind of rumor that crawls beneath the skin and keeps men awake at night. Whispers of a tomb buried deep in the desert. Older than dynasties, older than pyramids. Older perhaps than Egypt itself. A tomb said to be cursed, a tomb said to be waiting. Scholars laughed in the cafes, lifting glasses of Iraq as they dismissed the superstitions of villagers. Yet when they looked into each other's eyes, they did not laugh as much, for curiosity burns hotter than fear. It was an age of ambition, when archaeologists rushed like vultures to tear secrets from the sand, each wanting glory, each wanting their names etched into history. But some names are not written in gold, they are written in blood. The desert does not forgive arrogance, and the dead do not share their silence willingly. When the expedition set out, there were nearly 40 men, scholars, diggers, guides, all filled with hope, their camp heavy with crates, notebooks, measuring tools, and torches. They called themselves men of science, but their eyes gleamed with greed, with the hunger for treasures and discoveries that would make them immortal. None of them knew they were already walking into their own graves. The villagers at the edge of the Nile had warned them. Old men spat into the dust when they heard the destination. Women pulled their children close as though the very mention of the valley might snatch them away. "Do not go," one shepherd told them, his face carved with years of sun and sorrow. "The tomb does not keep its dead. It devours the living." The archaeologist smiled politely and moved on. But in the nights that followed, even the boldest among them admitted unease. Camels balked, refusing to move. Dogs whined and scratched at the sand as though something stirred beneath it. But ambition is a fire, and they pressed forward, scorched by their own desire. The valley lay hidden, a wound in the desert, its cliffs sharp as blades, its silence too deep, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. The tomb mouth was small at first, half buried beneath shifting dunes, a dark slit in the rock that seemed less like an entrance and more like an eye. Carvings surrounded it, etched so deep they had survived centuries of storms, symbols no one could read, jagged lines that looked more like screams frozen in stone. One of the men joked they were warnings, another said they were prayers, but none of them dared say aloud what they all felt. The carvings looked like hands reaching out, clawing to escape. With picks and hammers they tore at the stone, widening the gap, forcing the tomb to open. The air that escaped was not air but breath, foul and damp, the stench of something sealed away, and the men staggered, gagging. But still they went on. Torches lit, shadows stretched, boots echoed against stone untouched for ages. They stepped into darkness, and darkness stepped into them. The passage sloped downward, narrow and suffocating. The walls slick with dust and something that clung like oil. Symbols covered the stone, repeating shapes that twisted in the torchlight, almost alive. One man swore he heard a sigh soft as wind, though no wind moved in that place. Another laughed too loudly, the sound brittle, sharp, desperate. They reached a chamber lined with shattered sarcophagi, lids broken not from outside but from within, bones scattered, skulls cracked, jaws open as if still screaming. The silence was crushing, not absence but presence, heavy, pressing, alive. The archaeologist sketched quickly, hands trembling, and fled back to the surface. That night they sat around the campfire trying to laugh, trying to drink away the unease. But the desert was too still, the stars too sharp, the silence too thick. The fire cracked, and for an instant some swore they heard laughter, faint, distant, not belonging to any living throat. Sleep brought no rest. Men tossed and twisted, muttering, sweating, their dreams filled with narrow tunnels, with sand pouring into their mouths, with hands dragging them down. One man woke screaming and clawed at his throat until he bled. Another walked into the darkness beyond the fire and did not return. When dawn came, his footprints ended at the tomb entrance as though the earth itself had swallowed him whole. The leader of the expedition insisted on continuing. He spoke of discoveries, of treasures waiting, of history demanding courage, but his own hands shook as he spoke. They returned inside, deeper this time, mapping corridors that seemed to shift, walls that appeared different each time they passed. Symbols glowed faintly in the torchlight. Faces seemed to press against the stone, eyes wide, mouths stretched. Some swore they saw movement ahead, figures slipping just beyond the reach of light. But when they rushed forward, they found only emptiness. One torchbearer dropped his flame and refused to re-enter, whispering prayers, his lips cracked and bleeding. The others mocked him, but their laughter broke quickly. In the third chamber they found something worse. A pit carved deep into the rock, bones piled within, not arranged but thrown, shattered, broken, children and adults together, jaws open, sockets empty, The stench rose like a living thing, and one man vomited until blood came. Still they pressed on. They were too deep in pride to turn back, too bound to their hunger. And the tomb seemed to know. That night death came again. A worker was found sprawled at the edge of camp, eyes open wide, lips blue, his face twisted in terror. His nails were broken, clawing at the sand as though trying to escape something unseen. They buried him quickly without words, but whispers spread. Some said they saw his shadow still moving long after his body was still. Others swore they heard his voice begging from beneath the earth. Sleep abandoned them. Men lay awake listening to the desert, and in the silence they heard scratching, soft at first, then louder, as though countless hands clawed from beneath their tents. Some broke, fleeing into the dunes, vanishing, their screams fading into the night. Others clung to their leader, begging him to leave, but he refused. He believed the burial chamber was near, the discovery that would make them immortal. He was right, but not in the way he imagined. On the 12th day, they broke through into a vast chamber, wider than any cathedral, the ceiling lost in shadow. Torches flickered, casting light upon walls covered in carvings so dense they seemed to pulse. In the center stood a single sarcophagus, black stone taller than a man, its surface crawling with symbols that seemed to writhe when stared at too long. The leader stepped forward, hands trembling, voice steady only with greed. Against the pleas of his men, he pried the lid. The sound was like stone screaming. The stench that burst forth was unbearable, and the torches sputtered as if suffocating. Inside there was no body, no treasure, only darkness, thick, shifting, alive. A scream tore through the chamber, and then another, until the air was filled with terror. Torches fell, shadows writhed, and in the chaos men vanished, pulled into the dark, swallowed. Some clawed at the walls, leaving bloodied scratches. Others tore at their own skin, trying to escape something unseen. The leader was last, his journal clutched in his hand, ink smearing as he wrote a single line. The tomb is not empty. It waits, then silence. Days later, officials arrived, sent by worried sponsors when letters stopped coming. They found the camp abandoned, fires burned to ash, food untouched. The tomb door stood half closed, as though pushed shut from within. Fresh scratches marred the stone, deep gouges not made by tools but by hands. No bodies remained, no footprints, no bones, only silence, heavy and waiting. The officials fled, sealing the reports, erasing the expedition from records. But whispers cannot be buried. In Cairo's cafes, men leaned close, eyes wide, and whispered of the tragic tomb, of archaeologists who thought themselves masters of the dead and became its victims instead. Locals avoided the valley, calling it cursed, saying at night you could still hear cries drifting from the cliffs or see shadows moving against the stars. And even now, a century later, the place remains untouched, a blank space on maps, a wound the desert refuses to heal. Some believe the men are still there, not dead but trapped, their souls bound to the stone, whispering, waiting. Others believe the tomb itself is alive, not a resting place but a mouth, condemned and hungry, swallowing all who dare step inside. What is certain is this. In 1911, 40 men walked into the desert seeking glory, and not one returned. The sand gave back no bones, no names, no truth, only silence, cursed and eternal, a silence that waits for the next to be devoured. Egypt in 1911 was a land of mystery, sand and secrets older than civilization itself, a place where ambition and superstition collided under the scorching sun and in the shadow of monuments that had watched centuries pass. Scholars, fortune seekers, and adventurers poured into Cairo, driven by the hunger for discovery, their notebooks filled with plans, sketches, and dreams of glory. The city bustled with life and commerce, but outside its boundaries the desert stretched like a sleeping beast, silent yet alive, and beneath its dunes lay tombs that had never been meant for human hands. One such tomb, hidden beneath jagged cliffs on the outskirts of Cairo, had a reputation whispered among villagers and dismissed by outsiders. It was cursed, a place that devoured those who dared enter. When a team of European archaeologists set out for it, they carried tools, torches, and pride, but they could not carry caution or wisdom, and neither would save them. Villagers warned them with shaking heads and trembling hands, speaking of shadows that moved under the sand at night, of voices heard in empty valleys, of songs sung by the dead. The men laughed at superstition, their eyes fixed on ambition, their minds deaf to caution. They journeyed across the dunes, camels straining under the sun, carrying men and equipment alike, the silence of the desert pressing down upon them like a warning. At the edge of the cliffs the valley opened like a wound, jagged rocks cutting against the horizon, the tomb mouth a dark slit in stone, half buried, almost hidden, as if the earth itself wished to conceal it. Carvings lined the stone around the entrance, deep and jagged, telling stories that no living man could fully read, symbols that seemed to twist and shift when stared at too long. Some warned of judgment, some of eternal suffering, and the air itself felt thick, heavy, alive. The archaeologists ignored all signs, their hands eager for chisels, their hearts blind to dread. They pried and hammered, widening the entrance until stone fell with a sound like a groan from the earth itself. A gust of stale air escaped, foul and heavy, carrying with it the odor of centuries, dust, decay, and something undefinable, and still they pressed forward. Inside, the passage descended steeply, the walls slick with fine sand and a darker substance that clung to boots like oil. And the torchlight flickered, throwing shadows that danced and stretched along every surface. They reached chambers lined with shattered sarcophagi, lids broken from within, bones scattered across the floors as though the dead had been torn apart in fury. Faces frozen in terror stared from stone, mouths open in silent screams, eyes hollow. The men sketched quickly, hearts pounding, but greed pushed them onward, deeper into the tomb. Whispers echoed in the stone, low at first, almost indistinguishable, then louder, forming words that no one wished to understand. A language older than memory, promising doom. One man refused to move forward, muttering prayers, his torch shaking in his hand, but the others mocked him, their laughter brittle, failing to mask their fear. At night, the camp outside was restless, fire crackling and sparks carried by the dry wind. Yet the silence of the valley was absolute, oppressive, swallowing even sound itself. Sleep abandoned them. Dreams were thick with narrow tunnels, sand filling mouths, invisible hands dragging them down. Some awoke screaming, faces blue, hands clawing at throats as if the tomb had reached through their dreams to touch them. Others disappeared entirely, footprints ending abruptly at the tomb entrance as if the desert had swallowed them whole. The leader, desperate to maintain control and blind to the warnings, insisted on continuing, convinced that the burial chamber was near, that the treasures awaiting them were worth the danger. Deeper they went, corridors twisting unnaturally, walls seeming to shift, symbols glowing faintly in the torchlight, faces pressed into the stone, eyes wide, mouths open in silent agony. Every turn brought new horror. Pits filled with broken bones, jars of unknown substances, reliefs depicting the dead in torment, their hands reaching, clawing, their eyes accusing. The air grew heavier, each breath a struggle, and a stench that was almost alive rose from the chambers, pungent and suffocating. One archaeologist fainted, another vomited, and some trembled in place, too afraid to move, too proud to retreat. Yet the leader pressed on, chisels in hand, pride overriding fear, ambition drowning sanity. By the 12th day, they reached the largest chamber, ceiling lost in shadow, walls covered in carvings so dense they appeared to writhe when stared at too long. And in the center a black sarcophagus towered, covered in symbols, a presence that seemed aware, alive, waiting. As the leader pried open the lid, the tomb exhaled, a foul wind that threw men to the floor, torches flickering, shadows twisting violently. Inside the coffin there was no body, only darkness, thick, undulating, breathing. Screams erupted, men clawed at the walls, some vanished into the blackness pulled by unseen hands. Blood stained the floors, skin scraped raw by frantic hands, eyes wide in terror. The leader clutched his journal, ink smeared by sweat, writing a single line before silence claimed him. The tomb is not empty. It waits. Days later, officials arrived, finding the camp abandoned, fires cold, tools scattered. Not a single body remained. Fresh gouges marred the stone. Made by desperate hands, the desert had reclaimed everything. Whispers continued. The legend spread. The tomb condemned, cursed, and haunted, untouched for over a century, waiting still for the next fool to enter and vanish into its darkness. The desert kept its silence, yet it was alive, breathing over the valley, moving the sands to hide what had been disturbed. Weeks after the expedition vanished, local officials sent to investigate reported a scene of chaos. Tents ripped, supplies scattered, tools left as if abandoned mid-task. No footprints led away, no bodies remained, only emptiness and the oppressive weight of the tomb's presence. Those brave enough to peer into the chamber found the stone door half closed, marks of fingernails gouged deep into the rock, desperate, violent scratches carved by unseen hands. The air that leaked through the crack was heavy, foul, carrying an odor of decay and sulfur that made men retch. Officials fled, leaving the valley to its cursed silence, yet the story would not die. Whispers spread through Cairo, the tales told in cafes and markets of archaeologists who entered seeking glory and never returned. Names slowly erased from records, replaced with bureaucratic excuses. Some claimed they heard voices in the cliffs at night, echoing muffled screams of men calling for help. Others insisted on hearing chants or funeral songs carried by winds that should have been still. Shepherds refused to pass near the valley, caravans rerouted miles away, and the legend of the tomb grew into a cautionary tale, a horror whispered across generations. Scholars who later discovered fragments of the expedition's journals shivered at the descriptions. Footsteps where no one had walked, faces pressed into walls, eyes wide and mouths open in silent screams, walls that seemed alive. The final journal entry scrawled in a trembling hand read, "The tomb is not empty, it waits." Modern attempts to locate the tomb with satellites and aerial surveys leave only vague outlines, as if the desert itself erases the place from memory. Even today, the valley remains untouched, avoided, a scar upon the earth, whispered about by locals who insist that the dead are still hungry, waiting for the next foolish intruder. Dreams of those who approach the area are plagued with nightmares, suffocating tunnels, sand-filling mouths, hands clawing to drag them down, a voice that whispers in an ancient language older than any living memory. Travelers who wander too close sometimes disappear, camels found wandering alone, packs abandoned, and the echoes of screams carried across the dunes. The tomb is no longer just a story. It is a presence cursed and condemned, a silent, eternal trap that has claimed generations. Its memory persists in hushed tones, in cautious glances toward the cliffs, in fear that the desert will reclaim the living as it once claimed the archaeologists. History remembers them only in fragments, the empty names of those who dared. And the world whispers of the tragic tomb that swallows men, a place where curiosity meets death, ambition meets despair, and the silence of the desert is louder than any scream. As the days in the valley stretched on, the air grew heavier, each step inside the tomb more suffocating than the last. Shadows clung to the walls, stretching unnaturally, flickering in torchlight as if alive, whispering secrets no human tongue could speak. The archaeologists pressed forward, driven by ambition and greed, their notebooks and sketches abandoned as fear began to gnaw at their minds. Strange sounds echoed through the corridors, scratching, soft at first, then louder, like claws against stone, following them relentlessly. They began to notice walls shifting subtly when their backs were turned, symbols morphing, eyes appearing where none had been before. Some began mumbling prayers under their breath, others laughed nervously to mask terror. The leader remained adamant, pushing deeper, insisting discovery was within reach. But every man knew they had entered a place that had waited centuries for intruders, a tomb that judged all who dared to cross its threshold. Sleep became impossible. Dreams were filled with narrow tunnels and walls that closed in, whispers that called their names, hands dragging them into darkness. One scholar woke screaming, clutching the air as though something invisible sought to crush him. Others began seeing figures distant at first, just at the edge of vision, shadows that moved independently of light stretching toward them, beckoning, threatening. Food lost its taste, water its refreshment, and even the sun outside no longer offered comfort. When they returned to camp, they found tools misplaced, notes scattered, and torches extinguished despite no wind. Fear had already begun to fracture the group. Arguments erupted over small mistakes, over perceived betrayals, over who had seen what and who had imagined it. Men began to whisper about curses, about the tomb being alive, about how the sand itself seemed to pulse with anticipation. One night, a worker vanished from his tent, footprints leading to the tomb's mouth and ending abruptly, as though swallowed by the earth. Panic spread, but the leader forbade retreat. Each man felt the eyes of the tomb upon him, every symbol carved in stone now alive, their meanings shifting, shapes writhing. A door that had not been there yesterday appeared in a corridor, leading downward into darkness more complete than night itself. Candles flickered violently, throwing grotesque shadows on the walls. Strange odors filled the air. Rot, sulfur, the iron scent of blood long dried yet pungent and undeniable. Whispers grew clearer, forming half-words, then phrases that chilled the blood. Leave, never, death, forever. Some men collapsed, unable to continue, sweat streaming down their faces, hearts racing. Yet the leader dragged them onward, convinced the treasure, the secret, the immortal glory awaited them. By the seventh day, men had begun to see faces in the walls, faces twisted in silent scream, eyes pleading, mouths open, reaching out. One scholar swore he saw the remains of previous explorers, bones arranged in impossible positions, some petrified mid-struggle. Others saw figures crouched in corners, disappearing when approached. The air thickened, burning lungs heavy and stifling. Every sound, every movement, every flicker of shadow became magnified into terror. Screams were heard from deep within the tomb, but when men ran toward them, silence greeted them, suffocating, accusing. They found chambers lined with broken sarcophagi, jars of unknown substances, symbols depicting the dead writhing in eternal torment, hands clawing through stone. The weight of centuries pressed down. The tomb seemed to breathe, each inhale pulling at their sanity. Tools failed in their hands, chisels slipped, ropes frayed, candles extinguished spontaneously. The men began turning on one another, accusing comrades of sabotage, of bringing the curse upon them. Anxiety became paranoia, and the torchlight revealed faces distorted with fear, sweat, and blood from self-inflicted scratches. Some attempted to flee back to the surface, only to find corridors looping impossibly, doors leading nowhere, steps descending instead of ascending. Every attempt to escape was punished by fear itself. Whispers louder, shadows closer, cold air biting exposed skin. The leader documented everything, his journal messy, hands trembling. But even he began to realize that their ambition had awakened something ancient, something not content to remain buried. Outside the tomb, the desert remained silent, yet within its walls the air trembled, alive, sentient. The men's sanity frayed as the days passed, their screams echoing back from corridors that should have led to safety, but instead delivered them deeper into the tomb's maw. The very stone seemed to conspire against them, pulling, shifting, marking them, recording their terror, promising the same fate that had claimed countless others. It became impossible to tell reality from hallucination. Sounds were heard without source, shadows moved independently, and the air carried whispers in languages long forgotten. Bodies were found with eyes wide, hands clawing, faces twisted in eternal terror. Others disappeared entirely, leaving behind only torn clothing, footprints ending abruptly. And always a presence, patient, unyielding, watching, waiting, judging. The tomb had begun to feed on their fear, growing stronger as if the terror itself nourished it, binding their souls to its stone forever. The air grew heavier with every step, stifling and suffocating, the darkness deeper, the shadows longer, and the whispers clearer. Each man felt the tomb's gaze upon him, a living presence embedded in the stone, aware, patient, and cruel. Corridors twisted unnaturally. Rooms appeared where none had existed before. Ceilings lowered, walls closed, and torches flickered as though the flames themselves feared what lay ahead. Fear became tangible, pressing against their chests, wrapping around their minds like chains. Sleep was no longer possible. Even brief rests brought dreams filled with suffocating tunnels, the sounds of scratching, whispers calling their names, and hands dragging them deeper into blackness. Men began hallucinating, seeing figures at the edge of vision, shadowy forms crouched and watching, faces pressed into walls that had been bare moments before. Screams echoed endlessly, yet when they ran toward them, silence greeted them, thick, suffocating, alive. Arguments erupted, men accusing each other of betrayal, sabotage, and cowardice. Paranoia gripped the group, breaking trust and resolve. Some attempted to flee, only to find the tomb rearranged, corridors looping impossibly, doors leading nowhere, steps descending when they should ascend. A pit was discovered filled with bones, broken and shattered, some human, others unrecognizable, arranged in grotesque, impossible positions. Symbols carved into the walls seemed to writhe and pulse, forming faces, hands, mouths that whispered warnings no one wanted to hear. Candles extinguished spontaneously, tools failed in their hands, ropes snapped, and shadows stretched toward them with intent, always just out of reach, teasing, promising doom. The leader clung to his journal, documenting as best he could, but even his resolve faltered. Men began to vanish silently, a scream, a rustle of clothing, and then nothing, as though the tomb consumed them instantly. Those remaining were pale, eyes wide, lips cracked from thirst, faces streaked with dirt and sweat. They saw chambers that had not existed before, reliefs of men trapped, bones clawing through walls, shadows caught mid-scream, faces staring with eternal terror. One chamber contained jars of unknown substances, some thick and black, some red and viscous, smelling of iron, decay, and sulfur. The tomb seemed alive, every breath heavy, each step resisted, every heartbeat magnified. The men whispered, their voices trembling, praying under breath, questioning reality, sanity, and the wisdom of ambition. Outside the tomb, the desert remained deceptively quiet, sun blazing, wind still. Yet inside, the air pulsed with life and malice. By the 10th day, bodies were twisted and torn, some still gripping walls as if fighting to escape the unseen, others missing entirely, leaving only bloodied marks and whispers of their passing. Despair replaced hope, and only the leader's obsession drove them forward, desperate to reach the burial chamber, to witness the treasures within. In the deepest chamber, black sarcophagus stood as if waiting, crawling with symbols that seemed to writhe under torchlight. The tomb exhaled a foul gust as the lid was pried, darkness flooding the chamber, suffocating, swallowing torchlight. Shadows twisted violently. Whispers became screams, and men were dragged into the black, some clawing, some screaming, some vanishing. Blood-stained stone floors, hands scraped raw, bodies twisted mid-escape. The leader wrote in his journal, smudged ink by sweat and fear. The tomb is not empty. It waits, and then silence. The survivors fled, but none truly escaped. Fresh gouges marred walls, footprints ended abruptly. The tomb itself seemed to erase those who tried to leave. Outside, the desert remained calm, hiding the horrors within. The valley silent, waiting, cursed, condemned, a warning for those who dare tread too close. Whispers persisted in Cairo, in cafes, in the narrow alleys, of a tomb that devours men, of the cursed expedition, and of shadows that move in the sands, carrying screams across centuries. The valley became a place avoided, marked only by legend, a scar upon the earth, patient and eternal, awaiting the next fool to disturb its silence. Curiosity, ambition, and pride are no match for what lies buried, for the tomb is alive, watching, waiting, and eternal. The men who entered in 1911 became part of its story, their names erased, their lives claimed, their souls bound to stone. History remembers only whispers and warnings, and the desert keeps its secrets well, patient, cunning, and merciless. Even now the valley stands untouched, the cursed tomb breathing, ready, waiting for the next intrusion, the next arrogance that dares disturb its silence. And the sands conceal it, forever haunted, forever condemned. The day they reached the final chamber, the tomb seemed to inhale, heavy and oppressive, as if aware of their approach. The walls shimmered in torchlight, covered in carvings so dense and twisted they appeared alive, mouths opening, eyes staring, hands clawing through stone. The black sarcophagus in the center dominated the room, crawling with symbols that seemed to writhe when stared at too long. The leader's hands trembled, gripping chisels and journal alike, sweat streaming down his face as he approached. Every step reverberated, echoing back not just sound but an unnatural presence, as if the tomb was counting, judging, waiting. Torches flickered violently, shadows dancing grotesquely on the walls, and the air thickened, burning lungs making every breath a struggle. The men were paralyzed with fear, yet greed and pride forced them forward. The sarcophagus lid resisted at first, stone grinding against stone, and a low sound issued from within, a vibration felt more than heard, like a growl from the depths. When the lid was finally pried open, the tomb exhaled a wind so foul it threw men to the floor, knocking torches out, leaving darkness complete and suffocating. Shapes twisted in the black, writhing, reaching, unseen hands pulling at flesh, dragging men into shadows. Screams erupted, shrill and chaotic, echoing endlessly as bodies twisted, fell, or vanished completely. One man clawed at the walls, eyes wide in terror, nails breaking against the stone, yet he was pulled further into the darkness. Blood spilled across the floor, mixing with dust and sand, some smeared by frantic hands, others flowing freely from scratches and bites that left no visible assailant. Shadows leapt, elongated, wrapped around limbs, and men cried out to comrades who were already gone. The leader screamed commands, but they fell into the void. The tomb devoured sound as easily as bodies. Walls themselves seemed alive, narrowing the space, pressing in, forcing men together, suffocating. Some tried to flee, yet corridors shifted, doors disappeared, ceilings lowered. Every attempt to escape met resistance from the tomb itself, pulling, twisting, stretching the passageways in impossible ways. The air carried whispers, words in languages no one had ever known, promising death, eternal suffering, and despair. Torchlight revealed faces pressed into stone, silent mouths open in screams, eyes staring as though accusing intruders of their arrogance. The remaining archaeologists clawed at the sarcophagus, trying to pry the lid closed or open further, unsure which would save or doom them. Each breath brought nausea, panic, and the taste of iron. Torches sputtered, some extinguished completely, leaving men half blind, reaching blindly for friends who had already disappeared. One by one, Men were dragged into the black, hands gripping ankles, shoulders, legs, pulled by forces unseen, leaving nothing behind but torn clothing, smeared blood, and empty echoes of screams. The leader struggled desperately, pen in hand, writing frantic lines in his journal, documenting horrors beyond comprehension, but his strength faltered. Shadows reached for him, winding around arms and legs, twisting, constricting, pulling. The final entry was scrawled with trembling ink. "The tomb does not forgive. It feeds. It waits." Then silence claimed him, the journal falling into the darkness. Outside the chamber, the remaining men attempted to flee, but the corridors themselves seemed to conspire, leading them back into the room of horrors, walls pulsing, shadows dancing. The tomb had awakened fully, consuming every ounce of courage, every shred of hope. Screams mixed with whispers. Shadows stretched across walls and floors, and the air itself seemed sentient, pressing on lungs, crushing bones. The black sarcophagus exhaled again, a wind that carried the screams into every corner, sweeping away sanity, leaving men broken, hysterical, screaming in futility. Blood pooled, mixed with sand and dust, forming strange shapes, symbols that shifted as if alive, marking the tomb's claim on the living. One last torch sputtered and went out, plunging the chamber into absolute darkness. Silence followed, thick, oppressive, eternal. Not a single human sound remained. The tomb had claimed them all, leaving only echoes that would persist through history. The sand outside shifted subtly, as if closing over the valley, concealing the horror, preserving the tomb's secret, cursed and condemned, waiting for the next intruder. History would never record their names properly. The world would whisper of missing archaeologists, but the tomb would know, and it would remember. It was patient, eternal, insatiable, and alive. Darkness consumed everything as the remaining men struggled, every movement and effort against an unseen force that seemed to bend the tomb to its will. The walls pulsed subtly, alive, breathing, their carvings twisting into faces and hands, mouths open in silent screams that echoed the terror of those already claimed. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the tomb itself had multiplied their weight, pressing them down into the stone floor. Torches flickered and went out one by one, leaving men to stumble blindly, hands brushing against cold, damp walls that seemed to shift under their touch. The leader's journal was clutched desperately, pages smeared with ink and blood, a chronicle of horror that no human mind should comprehend. He recorded the voices, the movements, the impossible shadows, yet even writing could not stave off the creeping insanity. Men fell into pits that appeared suddenly, bones snapping as they hit the floor, only to vanish into darkness that seemed deeper than night itself. Screams filled the air, yet were swallowed instantly, replaced by whispers promising death, eternal torment, and the inevitability of the tomb's power. Hands emerged from walls, cold and unrelenting, grasping, pulling, dragging men into black corners where even torchlight could not penetrate. Desperation warped minds. Men turned on each other, accusing, striking, pleading, yet all efforts were futile against the living stone. Corridors looped endlessly, stairways led nowhere, doors closed spontaneously, trapping men in cycles of terror. The sarcophagus exhaled a wind of stench and decay, carrying voices of the dead, calling, mocking, dragging at sanity. Shadows enveloped limbs, stretching across floors and walls, and the floor seemed to tilt, tumble, swallowing feet, ankles, bodies into its depths. Some clawed at walls, others screamed in futile defiance, yet every movement tightened the tomb's grip. The air grew thick, almost liquid, filling lungs with heaviness, making every breath a battle, every heartbeat an agony. Shapes moved in corners, just at the edge of vision, faces pressed to walls, eyes wide, mouths open, fingers stretching toward flesh. One man vanished completely, a silent pull leaving only a smear of blood across the stone. Another tried to crawl toward a faint light, but the corridor shifted, turning back upon itself, leading him to the chamber again, where shadows waited hungrily. The leader fell, pinned by unseen hands, his voice drowned in whispers, his journal ripped from his grasp, pages flying into darkness. Men clawed at each other, tears streaming, nails breaking, blood mixing with dust and sand, forming grotesque patterns upon the floors and walls. The tomb itself seemed to pulse in rhythm with their terror, growing, feeding, expanding, bending the space to its will. Shadows elongated, stretching along walls, floors, and ceilings, intertwining, swallowing men whole. Whispers became louder, forming sentences, words no one had learned, promising death, eternal suffering, and the tomb's eternal memory of them. Blood-smeared floors, symbols shifted, carvings contorted, faces appearing and disappearing as if alive. Each one an accusation, a warning, a claim upon the living. Some men clawed at the sarcophagus, others at walls, others at the floor itself, seeking purchase, escape, salvation. But the tomb offered none. The air was thick with fear, the walls seemed to close in, and the remaining torches sputtered, guttered, and extinguished, leaving total blackness. Sobs, screams, and whispered prayers filled the void, yet no human sound persisted for long. It was consumed, erased, replaced by the tomb's own voice, ancient and merciless. The last man, leader among them, felt cold hands around his ankles, pulling, twisting, dragging him toward the sarcophagus, the blackness, the unknown. His cries were muffled instantly, swallowed by the tomb, and then silence claimed him, absolute and eternal. Outside, the desert lay still, sun blazing, winds absent, hiding the horror beneath layers of sand. The tomb, patient and eternal, remained, waiting for the next soul driven by curiosity, ambition, or pride to stumble into its maw. The valley became a scar, untouched and avoided, whispered about in Cairo and beyond, a place of legend, cursed, condemned, haunted. History recorded fragments, a name or two, but the tomb kept its true count, eternal and merciless. Those who dared enter were gone, swallowed, erased, leaving only blood, dust, whispers, and the story of a tomb that lived, breathed, and fed on fear. Shadows remain, carvings wait, and the desert conceals the horror, silent yet watching, patient and eternal, promising death to the next fool who dares intrude. When the desert claimed the last of the men, silence settled over the valley, thick and suffocating, as if the earth itself was aware of what had transpired. Weeks later, officials sent to investigate found only scattered tools, abandoned tents, and scorched notes, journals smeared with ink and blood, pages torn and illegible. No footprints led away from the tomb, no bodies remained, only the oppressive weight of absence. Cairo buzzed with rumors, hushed whispers in cafes and narrow streets of men who had entered seeking glory and vanished without a trace. The legend spread quickly, a tomb alive, cursed, condemned, waiting for the next foolish soul to enter. Scholars who attempted to piece together the expedition's story were met with frustration. Journals were incomplete, drawings incomprehensible, and descriptions of corridors and chambers contradictory, impossible to map. Local villagers claimed the desert itself had shifted, hiding the entrance, erasing signs, and moving sands over what had been disturbed. Some spoke of voices carried on the wind, muffled screams, chants in an unknown tongue, and shadows glimpsed moving beneath dunes at night. The government, embarrassed and unwilling to admit failure, wrote reports citing illness, desert hazards, and poor planning. But even bureaucratic explanations could not suppress the fear spreading among the scholarly community. Expeditions in following years failed to locate the tomb, despite maps, telescopes, and guides. It had become untraceable, hidden beneath shifting sands, almost as if the desert itself protected it. Whispers persisted that the tomb remembered, that it did not forgive, that each attempt to enter increased its power, its awareness. Descendants of villagers spoke of lights moving beneath dunes, shadows rising at dusk, and men screaming without reason. Families avoided the valley, caravans rerouted, travelers warned of cursed sands, yet curiosity still drew some, often never heard from again. Archaeology journals, fragments recovered, spoke of shadows in corners, walls moving, hands clawing from stone, symbols alive, breathing, judging. The story became legend, a warning to all who seek the dead for ambition or glory. Scholars debated endlessly whether the tomb's horrors were supernatural or a series of natural disasters, toxic gases, or hallucinogenic molds, but none could explain the disappearance of bodies or the marks left on walls. Over decades, the story spread internationally, becoming a cautionary tale among adventurers and academics alike. Museums occasionally displayed fragments recovered, stones marked with scratches, jars of unknown substances, all silent witnesses to the terror inside. Few dared venture close. Those who did often returned with tales of whispers, shadows, and suffocating air, confirming suspicions that the tomb was alive. Over time, the valley became a no-go zone, mapped as dangerous yet still recorded in journals as the tragic tomb, always followed by warnings and silent dread. Tourists were discouraged, locals avoided the area, and the tomb itself remained untouched, patient, eternal, waiting. Governments and archaeologists abandoned formal attempts to explore, though rumors of private expeditions persisted, tales of men disappearing without trace resurfacing sporadically. Folklore merged with reality. Children told stories of the tomb at night, and elders warned that it devoured not only flesh but pride, curiosity, and soul. Scholars attempting chemical or scientific analysis were thwarted by the desert. Shifting sands buried evidence, air carried away scents, shadows concealed truths. Attempts at exorcisms or religious rites failed. No prayers calmed the tomb, no offering satisfied its hunger. The area became synonymous with vanished men, forgotten ambitions, and cursed discoveries. Its reputation cemented as one of the most haunted sites in human history. Time passed, yet the tomb's story did not fade. It became legend, eternal, patient, awaiting new intruders. Letters, diaries, and whispers told of an overwhelming presence felt by anyone nearby. Suffocating, oppressive, ancient, insatiable. Even modern technology failed to locate it consistently. Satellites saw only shifting sands, anomalies attributed to mirages or natural formations. Yet explorers and adventurers remained drawn, compelled by ambition, greed, or foolish curiosity. Families of the vanished remained haunted by the stories, never finding closure, living with fear, imagining whispers, shadows, and the presence of the tomb even miles away. Scholars continued to study fragments, attempting to understand the symbols and carvings, often driven to obsession, some disappearing themselves. The tomb had become a lesson in human hubris. Ambition blind to danger, curiosity punished, lives consumed. It remained patient, eternal, unforgiving, a scar on the earth, a silent predator beneath sand and stone, remembering every intrusion, feeding on fear, always waiting. As years passed, the valley remained untouched, a desolate expanse of sand and stone, yet the legend of the tomb persisted, growing darker with each retelling. Locals spoke of eerie lights at dusk, faint whispers carried by the wind, and shadows that moved independently of any object. Scholars who dared approach were met with a sense of suffocating dread, their equipment failing inexplicably, compasses spinning, cameras malfunctioning, voices recorded only as static, and notes mysteriously smudged or torn. Attempts at excavation were abandoned when workers refused to enter, claiming invisible hands pushed them back, or that the air itself burned their lungs. Even modern mapping and satellite imagery could not locate the tomb reliably. The desert seemed to shift, hiding entrances, erasing tracks, preserving its secrets with uncanny precision. Stories circulated that those who approached too closely were plagued by nightmares. Tunnels that descended endlessly, walls that closed in, hands clawing from stone, voices screaming in a language older than memory. Families of vanished archaeologists remained haunted, reporting sightings of shadows resembling their missing relatives wandering the desert at night, yet always disappearing before contact. Academic journals recorded fragments of accounts, sketches, and secondhand stories, but each attempt at reconstructing the events ended in frustration, confusion, or madness. Expeditions to the valley often returned with fewer men than they started, sometimes one or two, minds frayed, eyes hollow, unwilling to speak of what they had encountered. Ghost stories merged with reality, shaping the valley into a place feared internationally. The tragic tomb that had swallowed every archaeologist alive. Even in Cairo, the tale persisted. Cafes whispered of men who had entered seeking fame, only to be erased from history, leaving empty seats and unfinished projects. Anthropologists debated the psychological effects, toxic gases, hallucinations, and natural phenomena, but none could explain the complete disappearance of multiple men or the markings left on the tomb's walls. Some claimed the tomb itself had intelligence, moving, shifting, and selecting its victims. Tourists were warned, maps marked it as dangerous, and folklore solidified around the valley's cursed reputation. Time did not diminish the tomb's presence. It remained patient, eternal, a predator beneath sand and stone, waiting silently for the next intruder. Any attempt to document, photograph, or explore only reinforced the stories. Equipment failed, shadows appeared in photos, footprints vanished, and strange sounds were recorded without source. Letters and journals left by survivors or witnesses spoke of overwhelming fear, whispers promising death, suffocating darkness, and impossible corridors that looped endlessly. Scholars obsessed over fragments of symbols, inscriptions, or jars found scattered across the desert, but most succumbed to obsession, some disappearing themselves, drawn into madness. The tomb became a cautionary tale of human ambition punished, curiosity punished, lives erased, a predator feeding on pride, greed, and hubris. Modern researchers attempting chemical or physical analysis failed. The tomb resisted, always hiding, always claiming the unworthy. Locals told stories of shadows moving beneath the sand, the faint sounds of scratching, scraping, and muffled screams carried by desert winds. Every tale reinforced the same truth. The tomb is alive, patient, eternal, and insatiable. It waits for the next explorer, the next fool, the next ambition daring enough to disturb its silence. Even now the desert conceals its secrets, shifting sands, shifting paths, hiding the entrance, maintaining its curse. Scholars, adventurers, and explorers speak of the tragic tomb in hushed tones, aware that curiosity is dangerous, ambition deadly, and the tomb eternal. The valley's legend continues to haunt history, a reminder that some places are not meant for human hands, that the past holds secrets too cruel to survive contact with the living. Whispers, shadows, vanished men, and impossible corridors ensure that the tomb is remembered, feared, and avoided. It stands as a monument to human folly, to the limits of courage, to the power of ancient curses, forever patient, forever condemned, waiting silently beneath the sand. Despite decades of attempts to uncover the tomb, it remained elusive, hidden beneath shifting sands, resisting all modern technology and human intervention. Satellites could only capture vague contours. Maps became unreliable as the desert shifted unpredictably. Explorers and archaeologists attempting to locate the entrance faced inexplicable failures. Equipment malfunctioned. Compasses spun, GPS systems recorded impossible coordinates, cameras malfunctioned, and radios picked up only static or whispers in unknown languages. Villagers spoke of strange lights at night, shadows that moved independently, and eerie sounds resembling the faint echoes of cries or chants carried by the wind. Stories persisted that the tomb was not merely a structure of stone but an entity, alive, sentient, and aware of all who approached. Those who dared enter reported hallways that twisted impossibly, chambers that appeared where none should exist, ceilings lowering, and walls shifting subtly, rearranging the interior at will. Visitors described sensing unseen presences, cold hands brushing their skin, fleeting touches, whispers calling their names in languages older than memory, messages promising doom, and visions of men long vanished. The tomb seemed to feed on fear, amplifying panic, creating hallucinations indistinguishable from reality. Some explorers documented shadowy figures crouched in corners, faces pressed into stone, eyes wide, mouths open in eternal scream, and symbols carved into walls that appeared to writhe and morph in torchlight. Chemical and scientific analyses failed to explain the phenomena. No toxic gases or hallucinogens were detected. No natural cause accounted for the distortions of space or the manipulation of light and shadow. Modern attempts to map the valley repeatedly failed, as paths vanished, dunes shifted overnight, and attempts to retrace steps led explorers back to the same cursed areas. Legend suggested that the tomb claimed more than bodies. It consumed sanity, leaving survivors shaken, hollow-eyed, unwilling to recount experiences, muttering about shadows, hands, whispers, and the relentless presence of the tomb. Some survivors returned with journals smeared with blood, pages torn or illegible, and they often died within months, raving of horrors no living mind should endure. Psychologists debated the influence of fear and isolation, but even controlled experiments could not replicate the tomb's effects. The environment itself seemed to manipulate perception, consciousness, and memory. Folklore intertwined with reality. Children were warned not to approach the desert. Elders insisted the sand hid something ancient, hungry, and patient. Explorers reported hallucinations that became progressively more detailed, including visions of the vanished archaeologists, replaying final moments in grotesque loops. Footprints appeared, then vanished. Shadows moved independently of any light, and strange shapes pressed against the walls, as if alive. Some researchers posited supernatural explanations. The tomb cursed, ancient spirits guarding its secrets, a place where the boundary between life and death blurred. Others believed in unknown physical phenomena, gravitational anomalies, temporal distortions, or unknown geological processes creating impossible structures. Attempts at religious intervention failed. Prayers, exorcisms, and rituals had no effect. The desert swallowed offerings, winds carried away symbols, and sand covered traces within hours. Modern drones and satellite imaging sometimes captured fleeting anomalies, shapes moving against natural contours, sudden darkness in specific areas, or inexplicable shadows. Historians noted the lack of official records. Many reports were suppressed, accounts edited or missing entirely, reinforcing the tomb's air of mystery. Those daring to investigate were often discouraged by local communities who recounted stories of whispers, shadows, and vanished men. Attempts to retrieve previous journals ended with the documents lost, stolen, or destroyed in unexplained fires. The tomb's legend became part of academic and folkloric discourse alike, a symbol of human ambition punished, curiosity fatal, and the insatiable patience of ancient entities. Researchers continued to debate, theorize, and attempt exploration, yet all outcomes reinforce the same conclusion. The tomb remains beyond human comprehension, its interior shifting, its curse persistent, its hunger unending. Those who approached felt an oppressive presence, shadows stretching unnaturally, corridors looping endlessly, whispers carrying threats of death and eternal suffering. Even modern technology could not capture the true interior or structure. Each attempt failed, as if the tomb itself manipulated perception, hiding, concealing, and judging. Maps were rendered useless, notes vanished or contradicted themselves, instruments malfunctioned, and survivors returned with frayed minds, stories incomplete or incoherent. The phenomenon persisted. The tomb seems to erase its own history, feeding on memory, leaving only fragments, whispers, and legends to tell its story. Folklore warned against curiosity, ambition, and pride, insisting the tomb is alive, eternal, patient, and insatiable. Every attempt to understand or map it failed. It remains a mystery, a predator beneath the sands, waiting for the next intruder, condemning all who approach, hiding its secrets, claiming its victims, and feeding on the living as it has for over a century. The desert surrounding the tomb remained deceptive in its calm, sun-bleached, windless expanse, hiding the horrors beneath with an almost deliberate patience. Explorers reported faint footprints appearing, then vanishing as though the sand itself erased evidence of passage, marking the tomb's silent dominion over all who approached. Shadows shifted independently of any source, moving against the sun, against walls, against reason. And whispers grew louder, clearer, forming words in languages older than history itself. Those who dared enter often experienced time differently. Hours could stretch into days, corridors looped endlessly, chambers rearranged themselves, and exits vanished as soon as they were found. Survivors spoke of walls breathing, closing in, expanding, and the air thickening with every step, pressing against lungs, weighing bodies down, and distorting sound. Objects moved on their own, tools vanished, ropes snapped without cause, and torches extinguished inexplicably, leaving explorers blind, disoriented, and terrified. Some reported seeing figures crouched in corners, faces pressed to walls, eyes wide, mouths open in eternal screams, watching silently as if recording every movement. Jars of unknown substances appeared scattered, black, viscous, and metallic smelling, some broken, some untouched, all silent witnesses to the tomb's cruelty. Attempts to photograph or document the interiors often failed. Cameras captured nothing, lenses fogged inexplicably, images blurred or showed grotesque shadows where none had existed. Survivors described hallucinations of their colleagues, lost in impossible rooms, repeating their final moments in endless loops, screaming, clawing, vanishing. The tomb seemed to sense fear, amplifying it, feeding on it, manifesting shadows and whispers to torment its intruders, ensuring that courage faltered and sanity eroded. Scientific explanations were insufficient. Toxic gases, mold, hallucinations, or psychological stress could not account for the total disappearance of multiple men, the rearrangement of stone and space, or the shifting corridors. Legends persisted that the tomb was alive, sentient, patient, eternal, selecting victims, feeding on pride, curiosity, and ambition. Villagers spoke of shadows in the desert at night, faint lights beneath dunes, and whispers carried across miles, warning that the tomb claimed more than bodies. It claimed souls. Even advanced technology could not consistently detect the tomb. Satellites, drones, and GPS sometimes captured anomalies, dark areas, shifting sands, strange patterns, but any attempt at approach ended in failure. Survivors returned with journals smeared with blood, torn pages, illegible writings, raving accounts of impossible spaces, corridors that looped, walls that moved, shadows that hunted, and voices that promised death. Psychological evaluations revealed trauma, fear-induced hallucinations, and obsession. Yet none explained why some men disappeared completely, leaving no trace, nor why the tomb resisted all forms of modern measurement. Efforts at religious intervention failed. Prayers, rituals, and offerings were ineffective, sometimes destroyed, sometimes vanishing without explanation. Folklore and history became intertwined. The tragic tomb, the cursed valley, and its patient eternal presence became cautionary tales for explorers, scholars, and locals alike. The tomb's legend persisted, evolving with each attempt to understand it, growing darker, more terrifying, and more mysterious. Explorers obsessed, some disappearing while researching, others returning hollow-eyed, trembling, refusing to speak. Every failed attempt reinforced the same conclusion. The tomb is alive, patient, eternal, and insatiable, feeding on ambition, pride, and human curiosity. Even today, the valley stands untouched, silent yet alive, the tomb beneath the sand waiting, always waiting for the next intruder. Whispers, shadows, vanished men, and impossible corridors continue to ensure that its mystery endures, guarding secrets beyond comprehension, reminding humanity that some places are not meant to be disturbed, cursed eternally, condemned by their own nature, patient, relentless, and alive. The desert hides its entrance, shifts the sands, and preserves the tomb's secrets, ensuring that the legend is more than story. It is a warning, a presence, and a trap for those who dare challenge the eternal patience of the tragic tomb. The valley remained silent, yet its silence was heavy, oppressive, alive. The tomb lay beneath the sands, patient, eternal, awaiting the next soul driven by curiosity or greed. Time passed, yet the desert did not erase its presence. Shifting dunes hid entrances, shadows lingered where none should exist, and whispers carried through the night, chilling the hearts of those who dared approach. Scholars, explorers, and adventurers spoke in hushed tones of the tragic tomb, aware that it was not merely stone and sand, but a living entity, hungry, intelligent, and unforgiving. Families of the vanished lived with endless uncertainty, haunted by stories, dreams, and visions of loved ones trapped within the tomb's shifting corridors. Even those who had never seen it could feel its presence, a weight in the air, a shiver in the spine, a whisper in the wind. The desert preserved the tomb with meticulous care, erasing all evidence of intrusion, punishing ambition, curiosity, and pride. Legends spread internationally. Scholars debated endlessly. Some dismissed the stories, others became obsessed, often vanishing themselves, leaving only incomplete journals, bloodstains, and whispered warnings. The tomb's interior remained unknowable, a labyrinth of shifting stone, impossible geometries, and living shadows, beyond the comprehension of any human mind. Whispers told of men clawing at walls, dragging themselves through corridors that looped endlessly, only to vanish into darkness deeper than night. Shadows twisted, walls breathed, air thickened, and the floor shifted unpredictably, swallowing limbs, dragging bodies, and leaving only blood, dust, and despair behind. Scholars who survived spoke of visions, hallucinations, and the sensation of being watched, stalked, hunted by the tomb itself. Even the most rational minds faltered, understanding that some phenomena defied logic, reason, and science. The desert, patient and eternal, concealed the tomb's true nature, waiting for intruders, feeding on fear, and erasing the unworthy. Attempts to map, photograph, or measure its dimensions failed. The tomb manipulated perception, distorted space, and controlled shadows and light. Survivors returned with incomplete accounts, journal pages smeared with ink and blood, their sanity frayed, their minds haunted by what they had seen. Modern technology could not capture the tomb in its entirety. Drones lost signal, satellites registered anomalies, and GPS coordinates shifted mysteriously. The valley became a place avoided, marked in maps as cursed, condemned, and haunted, yet always tempting for the ambitious and reckless. The tragic tomb became more than a location. It became a symbol of human folly, a lesson in pride, curiosity, and the consequences of disturbing forces beyond comprehension. Shadows, whispers, vanished men, and impossible corridors ensured its story persisted, a warning to all who dared seek glory or knowledge in its cursed depths. Even the most cautious explorers reported unease, sudden chills, the sensation of eyes watching, and whispers just beyond understanding. Legends merged with fact, the tomb existing as both history and myth, eternal, patient, and insatiable, guarding secrets of a past lost, waiting to punish those who dare trespass. Every failed expedition, every vanished soul, every unexplained sighting reinforced the tomb's terrifying reputation, ensuring that it remained unapproachable, its horror eternal, its presence unforgettable, a shadow over the sands, a predator beneath the desert, and a curse on those who sought it. The sands of the valley shifted quietly, concealing the tomb's true horrors, yet its presence was undeniable. Shadows stretched unnaturally at dusk, moving independently, while whispers echoed across the dunes, carrying threats, promises, and memories of those already consumed. Explorers who survived the tomb's first horrors often succumbed later to obsession, sleepless nights, hallucinations, and madness, haunted by what they had seen, what they could not comprehend, and what had vanished without a trace. The tomb's labyrinthine corridors, impossible geometries, and living walls continued to defy every attempt at mapping or measurement. Every journal, sketch, and note left behind told stories incomplete, fragments of horror, whispers captured in ink, smeared with blood, yet never the full truth. Families of the lost remained tormented, imagining shadows moving across their homes, hearing faint cries carried by the desert wind, feeling the cold hand of absence. Scholars debated endlessly. Was it a curse, a living entity, or a natural phenomenon beyond understanding? No answer satisfied, no experiment succeeded. Time passed, yet the tomb remained patient, eternal, its hunger unfulfilled, waiting for the next foolish soul, the next ambitious intruder. Legends grew. Stories spread across generations. Warnings passed quietly from villager to villager, traveler to traveler, whisper to whisper. The desert's silence, oppressive and still, became part of the tomb's terror, a constant reminder of the power it held, the lives it claimed, the sanity it destroyed. Expeditions, technological or traditional, all ended the same. Men disappeared, tools vanished, torches extinguished, shadows moved, corridors shifted, and air thickened with fear. Survivors spoke rarely, their words trembling, describing endless loops of stone, suffocating darkness, whispers, hands that dragged and shadows that consumed. Some refused to speak at all, retreating into solitude, haunted by visions that no one else could confirm. The tomb's legend became a lesson etched into human memory. Ambition punished, curiosity fatal, pride consumed, and the unknown eternal. Tourists avoided the valley, locals warned children, scholars recorded fragments, yet no one could fully explain or comprehend the tomb's power. Modern maps concealed it, GPS failed, and satellites captured only anomalies. The tomb existed beyond technology, beyond logic, beyond human comprehension. It had claimed the ambitious, the brave, the curious, feeding on fear, bodies and minds alike, leaving only shadows, blood, and whispers in its wake. The desert preserved it, ensuring that every story, every disappearance, every warning persisted, a living testament to human folly and the eternal patience of the tragic tomb. Those who dared approach faced more than stone and sand. They faced an intelligence older than memory, a predator patient and eternal waiting silently for the next intruder. Shadows, whispers, and vanished men remain the only proof of its existence. As the valley sleeps, cursed, haunted, condemned, yet alive, eternal, insatiable, awaiting those who would trespass its ancient, unforgiving halls. The tomb had survived time, discovery, and ambition, remaining untouched, undefeated, and unapproachable, a dark reminder of the past, a predator of the present, and a curse for the future. Its story endures, carried on whispers, on maps, in journals, and in the fears of those who know enough to avoid it. The tragic tomb beneath the sands of Cairo remains patient, eternal, a sentinel of horror, a monument to ambition punished, curiosity consumed, and human folly immortalized, forever waiting, forever watching, forever hungry.